wanted to talk tonight about this concept of the doer, and the phrase that we commonly use, or a lot of us use when we meet somebody for the first time, is the sort of mindless greeting of "How do you do?" And for some reason, that's interesting because uh, I mean, we say it all the time. We don't really think about what it means, but it's actually quite a profound question. How do we do? Well, anything. I mean, it's sort of the same question as who is living this life? Who's running the ship? Who's in charge? How's anything happening? How do I navigate in this world? Um, is there a separate me doing any of this? I mean, all of those are just different ways of expressing the same fundamental question. How do you do anything? How does that happen? So before we get into it, I wanted to um, restate Buddha's well-known quote that events happen, deeds are done, but there's no individual doer thereof. Okay, events happen, deeds are done, but there's no individual doer thereof. Okay, the first two phrases, I think we could all agree on. Events happen, deeds are done. Okay, we're good with that. But there's no individual doer thereof. We're saying, not so sure about that. So that's an area certainly worthy of investigation. And we don't want to take anybody's just word for it as a belief that we've packed on with the rest of the baggage. Even though it may have been Buddha who said it, we still have the obligation, if we want to really get to the root of it, to determine for ourselves whether that's actually true or not. Taking on anybody else's belief, no matter who they are, it's not helpful. It's helpful to take it as a pointer, like I wonder if that's actually true. I'll investigate it and check it out. So this is just good scientific method. Some scientist discovers something, publishes the paper, other scientists try to replicate the experiment. They come out with the same results and they say, well, no, actually that's true. I checked it out for myself and sure enough, that's true. So the same would apply here. In that way, the spiritual journey is actually quite scientific in a sense. Doesn't have the reputation for that, but if we're really looking for what's true rather than something that's just convenient to believe, it's a very rigorous process to um, apply the standards of actual knowing to everything. So when we talk about that sense of doing, it certainly feels like there's something here that's choosing to do this and not do that, or making choices about this or that. But I'd suggest that even though there's that sense of it, that part of that arises from the fact that this body is the only um, object that we have uh, through which we can interact with the world. So it feels like everything that happens through this body, through the activity of this body. Um, and that's fine. It does. I mean, it is how um, source, the infinite, whatever we want to call this entire manifest and unmanifest existence, requires form to interact with form. Um, so these bodies are the way that um, we experience the world through these bodies. So the bodies are required to um, think, to feel, to receive perceptions, to function in the world. So that's the body is necessary to do that, but that doesn't answer the question of therefore there is somehow inside this structure um, a separate, independent from the rest of life entity um, that we call me. Me is the doer of my actions, right? The thinker of my thoughts. So we can notice that thinking certainly happens. You know, we can all have that experience. Feeling certainly happens. We certainly are able to perceive things. So perceiving is happening. So there's no question that these functions are happening through this body mind. Um, so, and in fact, thinking, feeling, perceiving is basically how we interact with the entire world. That is our entire life experience within these, uh, three very basic ways of interacting with the world. So let's say we just go out to have a meal with a friend, um, outdoors and socially distanced, of course. But during that meal, we have, thinking, interchange of thoughts and ideas between this person that we're having supper with. Um, there may be sort of a warm feeling of friendship and camaraderie and laughter, and that feels good to the body. So thinking, feeling, and then there's also perceiving, watching the person's face, um, seeing the movements of this person's body, um, maybe giving them a quick hug at the end of the meal. So thinking, feeling, perceiving, and those are the avenues through which we have that interaction. And the same is true with um, every interaction that we have throughout our entire life. So again, we're not denying that thinking happens, feeling happens, perceiving happens. But again, we can't conclude, therefore, there's a separate entity here that's somehow responsible um, for that. A thinker, one who feels, one who perceives, a separate, identifiable, findable entity in there somewhere, if we just look hard enough. So that isn't proof. The fact that there's thinking, feeling, and perceiving isn't proof that there is someone, some entity within us that is actually in charge of that, doing it. Right? And, I was reminded when my daughter was about to be born. Um, she was born at home, and this was back in mid 70s, and hippie days, sort of the tail end of the hippie days. And we had a hippie MD attending physician. And fortunately, we had a midwife too, who was very competent. But the MD physician, while we were waiting for the birth to really start to happen, was out on the front lawn, laying on the grass on his back, looking up at the clouds, and was convinced that he could make certain clouds disappear with the intent of doing that. And I mean, there's some evidence for that, right? If you look at a cloud long enough, it has, may very well disappear. Clouds do disappear, other ones form, etc. Wasn't a perfect thing, of course. But it happened often enough that you could claim credit for it. So you could claim that it was actually a causal event, that intent caused something to happen. But anyway, the birth went well. The midwife was totally great, and my daughter was healthy. But the point of the story is that just because the clouds disappeared didn't prove causality. Uh, in the same way as just because thinking happens doesn't allow us to conclude that therefore there's a thinker of those thoughts. Um, so if we really look at thoughts, and we've talked about this before, um, we can believe that I decide to think a particular thought. Let's say I decided I'm going to make spaghetti for supper. Um, but the question always arises, like, where did that thought originate from? If it wasn't, if it didn't just simply arise, if it was a causal in nature, then something must have been prior to that thought that caused that thought. If we're the one thinking it, there must have been something prior to that thought that uh, caused us to think that thought. Otherwise, it would just be a spontaneous arising. So if that's the case, then we're chasing um, a thought back and back and back and sort of infinite regression in terms of where that, in search of an original thought somewhere in the distance. So that doesn't make sense. So what we can notice, and what it really does appear as, is that thoughts arise. Where they arise from, um, hard to say actually. Whether it's from the subconscious, whether the brain is really just a receiving organ. Um, but what all we can say is that the moment before, the thought wasn't there, and then it has a rising and a beginning, has a certain lifespan, and then at some point it recedes back into silence, into wherever it may have come from, and another thought arises. So again, the arising of the thought um, doesn't imply that there's an actual thinker of the thought. Thinking is happening, thoughts are present, thoughts being sort of an energetic object, an energetic form, um, not quite as solid as the chair, but form nonetheless. So, we can see that it's possible to notice that thinking is happening, and sort of the spontaneous nature of that. If we were in control of thinking, if there was a thinker of the thoughts, that we should be able to control the thoughts. We should be able to turn them off, turn them on, think what we want to think, not think what we don't want to think. We should be able to be silent for 40 minutes in meditation. Um, we shouldn't think, we shouldn't be um, tormented by thoughts that we don't want to think about. But none of that is true. So we can see that the thinker, the thoughts, isn't um, isn't present. It's not to be found. So what we can um, uh, look at also is, well, is the same thing true for, how about the doer of our actions, the doer of our deeds? How about that? Is there an entity for that? Something inside that decides, I want to do this. I'm going to make a decision about that. Um, there's a sense of having choice, right? Choice, free will. I'm an independent person and I'm going to choose to do this rather than that. Right? It feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, we can acknowledge that it feels like that. That doesn't mean that that's what it actually is. I'd suggest it feels like that because this aliveness, a sense of awareness, has become so thoroughly fused with our belief that what we are is this body mind, that it feels like I am the one doing it. Me as a separate independent person is what is deciding to take this action and not that action. But when we start to look at it more closely, we could even I don't know, sit back at the end of the day and sort of review some of the themes of the day, things that we spend some time doing during the day, and sort of think back of why we why we chose to do them, not in the moment, but sort of over a lifetime. I mean, if let's say you were enjoy doing little carpentry projects around the house, and you wonder how did I get interested in that in the first place? I mean, some people like to do that, some people don't. And you can think back, well, actually, my dad had a few tools out in the garage, and he showed me how to use a few of them when I was a kid. So now, as an adult, it doesn't feel mysterious or strange, or I feel comfortable doing that. So, it's not surprising that that's what I did. Or maybe, I don't know, you might find yourself, putting a frozen prepackaged dinner in the microwave for supper, and you think back as, well, when I was a kid, my mom didn't really like to cook, and it was never, she was always sort of in a poor mood just before supper time when she was making dinner, and I just didn't feel like being around that. So I never really was interested in making supper, and now I don't know how to do it really. So I just buy this prepackaged food and eat that. So we can see sort of a thread that goes back that really reflects how we are now. Whether maybe a profession that we chose. I mean, did we really choose it, or was it a matter of happenstance that we had um, I don't know, a really interesting teacher in fifth grade, and that person inspired us, and we ended up going in that direction. Or maybe one of our parents was a scientist, and so we were interested in science, or so we can trace these threads back and see how much of what we do now, day to day, how we choose to spend our time, is really, we can see the source of that very, very often, um, back at a younger age. And it's, gone through different convolutions along the way, but there was a seed planted back then. Maybe we'd like to read and remember that, oh yeah, mom used to read a bedtime story to me when I went to bed. I felt good. I got interested in reading, or maybe a high school teacher inspired me about books, but often we can trace a thread back to um, how our life looks now. And the fact that those sort of seed-like incidences happen were just really a matter of chance and circumstances, and then our life unfolded in this way. Um, so it raises the question of, am I really doing that, or is it just a result of having had these particular experiences way back when, and now my life tends to look more like this? Um, the other interesting sort of experiment that we could do is, this is good on a day when you don't have any obligations at all, but you could um, decide to, let's say, just sit on your couch or in your chair and not do anything um, volitionally. Just wait for the body to do whatever it's going to do and sit back and watch. So you're just intentionally sitting back as an observer. And I guarantee you at some point the body will get up off of that couch and do something. You know, I mean, it may get up and go to the bathroom. It may get up and go make a cup of tea. It may decide, well, enough of this, I'm going to go out for a walk. It will do something. And so we can see that it there'll be a movement there even when we have an intention otherwise. Right? So this whole question about will, like the freedom of choice, as we have been taught to think about ourselves as separate, independent, body, mind, organisms out in the world. Um, we've been taught to believe in the ability to choose and free will of choice, and that's great. As long as it feels like that, then that's um, we should choose to exercise that will. Um, so from the the sense of a separate person, there feels we're convinced that we have free will, right? At some point when we discover what we actually are is awareness, um, when that discovery is actually a discovery that there never was a separate self. It was just an idea, a concept, um, mind structure that we had about ourselves, that there was a separate self. So that's what we wake up from, that illusion that somehow there is a separate self. So when we wake up from that, we look back, realize that there never was a separate self. It's not that the separate self improves its way to enlightenment. We just realize, well, actually, it's not true. It's just not true. And from the perspective of awareness, looking back at the separate self, we can see, well, if there never was actually a separate self, then there never was free will. But it feels like it, until we realize, well, actually, it's never was. You know, there's still movement, right? There's still, we still do things every day. There's no problem with the doing. The issue is with the self-identification as me, as the doer, as a separate self, apart from all of life. So there was a time in our life when that wasn't the case. Um, I've talked about it fairly often. The first year and a half of our life, fully alive. Right? I remember my daughter moments after birth, eyes wide open, obviously conscious, there, amazed, in awe of whatever it was, trying to just didn't know what any of it meant, didn't have names for any of it, but was totally present. And that's more or less how we spend the first year and a half, or maybe more of our life, until we learn that things have names, um, realize that people are responding to me as if I am separate. But prior to that, we have no trouble, sort of mm, moving our arms, moving our legs. Um, we can giggle if something amuses us for some reason. We can cry if we're unhappy. We learn to crawl. We learn to nurse. We learn to do things, but none of that is from the perspective of I, as a separate self, am doing this. It's just all happening, right? There's still obviously aliveness there. There's no problem with that. We just haven't subjected it to a thought structure at that point. So the movement is happening, um, but there's no belief that I am the one causing my arms to move. I am the one crawling. I am the one crying. None of that. Crying is happening, sure. Giggling, yes. Crawling, yes. But not the idea of I am the one doing it. So that's something that we've learned after infancy sometimes. And there's a period like after infancy when we begin having this identity, like I'm separate. And probably for some period of time, I don't know, maybe another 6, 8, 10 years, we may go back and forth where we, are caught in that sense of identity. Me as a separate, I want this, I demand that, getting bossy or, trying to manipulate our parents or whatever we do. There can be that tendency. And then the next minute we're out playing and giggling and laughing, forgetting all about ourselves. So we, during that period, we can go back and forth quite often. And you can watch children do this. They can, be totally, into their self-identity. And the next minute, just forget all about themselves, laughing, giggling. But as we sort of work our way into, through teenagehood and into adulthood, that sense of, no, this is me, I'm separate, I'm the thinker, I'm the doer, that becomes more and more solidified. But even now, it is not completely solidified, right? There are times when we forget um, all about ourselves, often, like every day. It's not even like a spiritual practice thing. It's just something that we naturally do. Like if we're, I don't know, totally absorbed in something that we enjoy doing, let's say gardening, we're just weeding and enjoying the breeze, and we're not thinking about, I am the one enjoying the breeze. This is me sort of weeding. It's just an enjoyment. It's just a presence. Weeding is happening. The planting the seeds is happening. There's not the sense of, it's me doing this. It's just happening. We're aware. That's all that's required, and we do what needs to be done. It also happens when we're surprised. Suddenly the mind stops. We're no longer thinking about us. Happens when um, in an intimate relationship with someone, the caring, the focus is on the other person. It's not like I am the one, being loving. I am the one being intimate. No, it's just flowing, right? It's not an effortful thing. It also happens when our attention is pulled in a direction. Let's say here we have these great blue herons that make this sort of loud prehistoric squawk, sometimes at night. When we were first here for, I don't know, first 6 months, we didn't know what it was, but it was this startling, really loud sound, often at night. And um, but when it happened, it's like suddenly all our attention would be there. And in those moments where our attention is pulled out towards an object, out of curiosity, fascination, um, forget about ourselves then too. So there's many times during the day that we forget about being the doer. Right? Also happens in deep sleep. Um, there's no sense of I am in deep sleep now. I'm doing this. No, we don't have any memory of it at all. There's still awareness happening, right? But there's not a memory of that period because there was no objects of awareness present during that deep sleep. The awareness was there, but it wasn't the awareness of a particular object like there is in a normal dream state. So, but there's still awareness there because if, like last night and 1 o'clock in the morning, there was this brilliant flash of lightning and then a really loud clap of thunder that felt like it was just, very close to the house. So even in deep sleep, if there's something alarming happening, the alarm clock, clap of thunder, whatever, um, uh, we immediately wake up. If there wasn't awareness there, there would be we wouldn't be awakened. But in this case, the doer, we can see that the doer comes and goes, but the awareness is present. The awareness is that continuity. So when we're looking for the essential self, it seems like one obvious characteristic that would be needed would be that whatever we are can't exist and then not exist and then at some later point come back into existence. You know, something would need to be continuous. So the sense of doer can't be our essential self. It's a function. It's something that we notice is happening. Um, Doing is happening. We notice that, but that sense of there being a separate, independent entity somehow that's calling the shots, um, that's a concept, just a conceptual thought that we believe, right? So there's a difference between a concept and a belief. Okay, a concept might be a body. A body is a concept, right? It's a concept because it's not precise, it's sort of a larger category. Like this body looks different than your body. You know, so that this body looks different today than it did 10 years ago, 1 year ago. So body is just a concept. It's a sort of a broad category of things that we can sort of agree, okay, that sort of looks like a body, more or less, all different, of course, but we'll use one term to sort of refer to it. It's convenient. Okay, so that's a concept. A belief is, I am this body. So the concept isn't a problem. Concept is useful. Um, Not ultimately useful, but you know, for getting around and talking to people, it's useful. A belief isn't. A belief is something that we don't know is true. We knew it was true. It's not a belief anymore. It's a knowing. Right? So anything that feels like a belief is worth investigating to see if it's really true or not. So as we look into the sense of doing, um, you know, we come up with the same problem. There's the doing, and there's things that happen, but when we go looking for some internal separate being, you know, that little Wizard of Oz in there that's controlling the levers and of doing, um, it's remarkably elusive, you know. So when we hear Ramana's direction to, you know, find out, you know, who am I? Um, a lot of us for a long time, you know, keep looking for what I'm looking for, you know, what I am. Um, if we're looking for an object, right, something that we can see, look at, see the form of, whatever we look at will be subordinate to whatever it is that's looking. So what is looking is actually the awareness. So the awareness is aware of anything that arises within the awareness, including the concept of a doer. So one of the risky things about Advaita teaching is that one of the teachings is, um, you know, there's no doer, um, you know, it's all God's will. Um, but if the belief is, I am a separate self, that's what it feels like. And then we combine it with another belief that there is no free will, it's all God's will. suddenly we have a separate self that's been disempowered. And that ain't fun, right? It's much better to feel like, if I'm going to feel like I'm a separate self, uh, it's far more preferable um, to believe that you have free will. Just go ahead and do it. As long as it works, go for it. Um, because that's what it feels like, and that can actually have some benefit. If it feels like it motivates you to do something, achieve a goal, great, wonderful. Um, we may find out later that um, it was never a personal will. It was never whatever was moving us actually came from something much deeper than that. You know, even the movement to, I don't know, pursue spirituality, that, that, that movement, that sort of divine longing, um, I see us coming from someplace much deeper. We can take credit for it. We can feel like, no, that's me. I decided I want to do this. And, you know, it's my volition, it's my choice, and I'm going to do it. Great, wonderful, do it. But the danger that I was talking about right there is sort of combining two beliefs that when you put them together, disempower us. And that would be the belief in a separate self and the belief um, of no doer, no individual doer, um, that everything is out of our hands, it's all God's will. So if you believe a separate self, go ahead and believe that you have free will. Make a decision, do it, you know, and feel good about it, you know, and, um, you know, take that as far as it will go. One thing we'll discover is that if we actually were the doer, then not only would we be able to choose what we'd like to do, we'd also be able to determine the outcome all the time, right? That's not the case. We choose something and then the outcome is out of our hands, right? So it's not like we actually have control. If we were actually the doer of our deeds, we would have control. We would have control about how we responded, how it unfolded. But, you know, we can realize just from noticing what happened today or over the last 30 years that um, you know, we make an effort in this direction and life unfolds as it unfolds. And, you know, we can call that by whatever name we choose to. We can call it God's will, we can call it grace, we can call it, you know, this manifestation unfolding as it unfolds. Um, but that's what we discover when we recognize that what we essentially are is this awareness that we're present for that unfolding, that we allow that to function as us, through us, um, and that is how we experience the world. You know, when we're not trying to manipulate the world, when we're not trying to, you know, coerce the entirety of life into um, a direction that we are choosing. And it's actually much more fun, much more enjoyable to just allow that life to flow as it flows. Um, we are present for it. We are witnessing it. We are enjoying it. We are at peace with it, not resisting it. We're allowing it to be as it is. We do our part, sure. However that part appears in that moment. But we're doing it out of a sense of freedom, out of a sense of enjoyment, out of a sense of movement, flow. You know, it's not that we're trying to do the right thing. It's not that we're trying to save face. It's not that we're not trying to get hurt. It's not that we're trying to get what we want, you know, at the expense of somebody else. It's not that we're having to defend ourselves. None of that is at play. And what's left is this sense of presence, awareness, movement that feels and is more and more in alignment with how life as a whole is unmoving. One of the things that we can notice is it feels like, we are part of this sort of moving dynamic, right? That's what it feels like out in the world, doing things are happening. But when we really look at what this awareness is, the awareness is itself unmoving. It's unmoving. It's always here. Every time I step into that awareness, it's always here. Everywhere else too, of course, but my sense of it, wherever that is, it's here. It's what I am, what we all are. In that sense of, for all of us, that awareness is here, unmoving. Events are happening, right? Events are happening, deeds are done, but it's sort of like um, I don't know. Let's say you were driving your car, scenery's going past, right? If someone was sitting next to you and taking a movie of you sitting there driving the car, um, you're not moving. So from the perspective of awareness, there's that motionless still point. Scenery's coming past. It goes faster when we press on the gas pedal, right? Slower when we press on the brake. So it depends on from what perspective we're looking at. If we're looking at it from the perspective of the body mind, sure, the body mind is, appears to go through space and move about in the world. Um, we can move our arms and legs out in the world, but the awareness is always here. All of that is happening around us. Another example might be if you were on a treadmill, exercise treadmill, and you were walking and you closed your eyes, you'd still be walking. And so the body would feel like I'm moving, right? But actually you wouldn't be going anywhere at all. It would feel like you were walking, moving the body, but actually you'd still be in the same place after 10 minutes, right? You wouldn't be in the same place relative to the sun, but relative to awareness, we are always exactly here. So we can see this sort of still point, this piece that is present, is alive, um, and everything happens. Everything happens, and we can be present for that, enjoy it, participate in it. Um, um, Knowing that it can't be hurt, knowing that it is beyond the reach of fear. It's not in the world of objects, thoughts, feelings, perceptions. It is what notices all of that. What notices all of that is beyond thought, feeling, perceptions. It's not having a certain feeling, like a certain good feeling, a certain high feeling, a certain blissful feeling. Those will all come and go. Those are all states. The awakeness is what is present and untainted by everything that happens. And that is our true nature.